We often think of the Second World War as beginning with a single violent act, an invasion, a declaration, a line being crossed. But what if the deadliest conflict in human history didn't start with a bang, but with a signature? What if it began 20 years earlier in a gilded hall in France with a piece of paper meant to secure peace forever? On June 28, 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, officially ending the Great War. The world breathed a sigh of relief. But for one nation, Germany, it was not a peace treaty, it was a national humiliation. The treaty forced Germany to accept full blame for the war, to pay crippling reparations, to dismantle its army, and to give up its colonies. It was a peace built not on reconciliation, but on punishment. And this is where our story truly begins, not with soldiers, but with a feeling of resentment, of injustice that festered in the heart of a broken country for 2 decades. Humiliation is a powerful poison. This feeling created a vacuum, a void of national pride and economic hope. And into that void stepped a charismatic, failed artist with a talent for channeling a nation's rage, Adolf Hitler. He promised to restore Germany's honor, to tear up the shameful treaty, and to reclaim its place in the world. But Germany was not the only place where ambition was stirring. In Italy, Benito Mussolini and his fascists dreamed of a new Roman Empire. And far to the east, the Empire of Japan, a rapidly industrializing power, felt constrained by its small islands. It needed resources, oil, rubber, steel, and it cast its eyes on its neighbors. In 1931, years before Hitler invaded Poland, Japan invaded Manchuria in northern China. This was the first major act of aggression by what would become the Axis powers. The world watched and did nothing. The League of Nations, the international body created to prevent another war, issued a condemnation. It was ignored. The world's great powers, crippled by the Great Depression and haunted by the memory of the trenches, were paralyzed by a desperate desire to avoid another conflict. This paralysis became a policy, appeasement. When Hitler began to rearm Germany in direct violation of the treaty, the world looked away. When he marched troops into the Rhineland, they looked away. When he annexed Austria, they looked away. They hoped that by giving him what he wanted, he would eventually be satisfied. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously returned from a meeting with Hitler in 1938, waving a piece of paper and declaring, "Peace for our time." It was a catastrophic miscalculation. They didn't understand that they weren't dealing with a statesman who could be reasoned with, but with an ideologue who saw compromise as weakness. And so the stage was set. The lines began to be drawn. On one side, the Axis powers formed: Germany, Italy, and Japan. 3 nations bound by a shared belief in military expansion and authoritarian rule. On the other, the Allies slowly began to take shape, initially led by Britain and France, who had pledged to defend Poland if it were attacked. The final moment came at dawn on September 1, 1939. German tanks and planes stormed across the Polish border. This time, there was no looking away. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The war had begun. But to say it was started by one man or one country is to miss the deeper truth. Hitler may have lit the match, but the world was already soaked in gasoline. It was a perfect storm of unresolved anger from the last war, the desperation of a global economic collapse, and the catastrophic failure of the world's democracies to stand up to aggression when it was still possible to stop it. The conflict that followed was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. It would eventually involve more than 50 countries and 100 million soldiers. It was a total war, where the line between the battlefield and the home front blurred and then vanished entirely. From the Blitz in London to the firebombing of Tokyo, civilians became targets. The United States, initially committed to neutrality, was pulled into the fray after the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. The Soviet Union, which had signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler, was betrayed and invaded,
joining the Allies in a desperate fight for survival on the Eastern Front. For 6 years, the world burned. By the end, in 1945, the Axis powers were defeated. Germany was in ruins, its cities turned to rubble. Japan surrendered after the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs, unleashing a destructive power the world had never imagined. The consequences were staggering. Over 70 million people were dead. Entire nations were bankrupt. The full horror of the Holocaust was revealed, a systematic, industrial-scale genocide that forever scarred the conscience of humanity. The world had looked into the abyss and seen the very worst of what it was capable of. But out of that wreckage, something new was attempted. The victors did not repeat the mistakes of Versailles. Instead of punishing their former enemies, the United States launched the Marshall Plan, investing billions to rebuild Europe, including Germany.
The world came together to create the United Nations, a new organization with a stronger mandate to prevent future wars. And from that, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was born, a revolutionary idea that every single person on Earth has inherent worth and dignity. There are no good outcomes of a war that kills tens of millions. There are only lessons, hard-won, brutal, and unforgettable lessons. The story of how World War II happened is not just a story about history. It is a timeless warning about how easily things can fall apart, how nationalism can curdle into hatred, how economic despair can make people vulnerable to dangerous ideas, and how the silence of good people in the face of injustice can be the most dangerous sound of all. The war ended in 1945, but the fight against the ideas that caused it never does. And that is a lesson we forget at our own peril.